Hello, everybody. I'm here with Andrea Schara. She was an apprentice to Dr. Murray Bowen for 14 years, and she's just a wonderful person, a creative, and a storyteller. And she's got an upcoming book called When Your Brother Tells You He's Jesus Christ, What Will You Do? Uh, I don't know what I'm going to do, but let's find out what Andrea's doing about it or did about it. It's so great to have you here, Andrea.
Thank you. I appreciate being asked, and it's wonderful to have time to really stretch my mind out and enjoy being with you, and grateful for the people who tuned in and are interested. And hopefully I can, be entertaining.
Well, that I can guarantee that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I thought I'd start out, that I'm the oldest sister of two younger brothers. And I was really struck when my brother told me that, he drives up in his blue surfing van. Just to give you the idea, he's 31, 32, and I'm 2 years older than he is. And I had two, 7 and 9, and had recently gotten divorced after my maternal grandmother, who helped raise me, died 3 months later.
mm,
So it was one of those, chaos creating death spirals, death and divorce, DD. There was no A plus in this. Yeah, it was just chaos. I had no idea what to do,
mm.
because my maternal grandmother, Anna Marr, was an amazing woman who could do everything. And so once she was taken off my man, I just hit bottom.
Ah,
And so I knew firsthand about the forces. I didn't know the purpose of them, or, why the family just fell apart after my grandmother died. It took me a few years to figure this out. But I knew somehow that my brothers becoming Jesus had to do with my grandmother's death and uh, my mother coming to visit. So
mm.
it's a lot of information for people to absorb. But I'll just, take a moment to just imagine I had lived in a very socially constructed, calm on the outside family. And you might know, I don't know if you heard Dr. Bowen in any tapes or anything talk about the clean symbiosis and the dirty symbiosis. So the dirty symbiosis would be one that's where there's so much chaos and drinking and craziness, and yeah, yeah, you can just see all this stuff playing out. And then the quiet symbiosis would be where there's some real intense fusion and no one talks about it.
Mm.
No one
Eh,
says anything.
It's all kept under the surface.
Yeah. And so my grandparents were like that. They were calm, they were quiet. And
Mm.
my parents drank after the war. And so I lived with drinking parents for 2 years, my youngest brother being two. And we had moved from Miami to Daytona at that time. And he had borrowed money from my grandfather to start a gas company, Pyrex gas company in Miami. And then one night they just got terribly drunk. And the neighbors called 911, come get this. They're falling apart right here in Miami. Get them off the streets. So my parents got arrested and we were sent to an orphanage for 3 days. And that began my strategy brain firing on all cylinders. Okay, I said to my brother Butch, we've got to escape from here. This orphanage stinks. Let's hitchhike back from Miami to Virginia. I lived in Virginia Beach with my grandparents. And my brother Bush was like, how are we going to do it? Here's the plan. And the old plan. I'll make a fuss. You'll sneak into the building where Drew is. He was not quite two yet. You grab Drew. I'll meet you on the road and we'll hitchhike back.
That's a solid plan.
But before we could enter act out our plan, my grandparents came down and went to court and got custody of us and eventually adopted us. My mother being an only child, there was no one else who was going to adopt us, but they were, in their 60s
Mhm.
and they were very socially aware. But my grandmother used to say, my best friend is my best friend because she never asks about your mother. And so
Mm,
I gathered from that that I shouldn't ask about my mother either. Where did she go? When will she come back? What's going on? It was just
mm.
a little bit young. But I have this really wonderful drawing. And if we shared screen, I could show it to you, but I'll describe it instead. So I'm 9 years old. I've got this nice looking stationery, my grandmother's. Dear Dad, please take my advice. And then below that are the planes attacking the whiskey bottles. And says, milk, okay. Coffee, okay. But submarines, airplanes, all that are taking the whiskey down. So yeah, at 9, I was already a pretty good therapist.
You knew what to do. Uh,
I'm still trying to get over that impulse, but so that at least gives a warm up idea of what it was, the beginning was like living with my grandparents who were, very organized, highly organized and wealthy people. So they could send us to boarding school and camp away. And um, I was able to get married to a really guy that all the boxes checked out. He was a Marine, didn't drink, um, Catholic, didn't curse, wanted to have children. So why not? 20 years old. He was 21. He wanted to have a wife if he was going to go and be stationed somewhere. And he, made that very clear. This is your chance. Let's get married or let's break up. What do you want? So I got married and have two
mm.
wonderful children and 8 wonderful grandchildren and still learning. My brother Butch, uh, who I've dedicated this book to, basically, he and Dr. Bowen. So I don't know where to jump in. You might have some questions, but I'll just tell one Dr. Bowen and Butch story. So
Please.
as a preface, I would just say that Dr. Bowen was always testing people to see what they would do. Not everyone agrees with me. Some of my best friends say I give Dr. Bowen too much credit. But I spent a lot of time with him and noticed I'm a pretty good observer. And I just noticed how he was testing people and how they would respond. So he had a little spiral notebook and he would write all this stuff in his spiral notebook. Who came to the meeting at what time, for instance?
Mm.
And so you were being observed all the time. And so uh, 10 years, I met him in 76, and I'll start with that. But the most important part in 1976 was that I was confused. I had no idea. I'd never met anybody with the psychosis. And I basically turned my life over to the psych. All right. So I really wanted to get to the amazing ability that Bowen had to sense what was going on and to insert himself into the conversation, into the story in a way that I think shed light on the emotional process. No one really knows what the emotional process is. They talk about it, but he could see it and take a stand, and that would really irritate a lot of people. But for me, it was this is how he does research.
Mm.
This is what he's doing to break up the emotional field. All right, so 10 years into this, I have a party for my two children who are graduating from college. I invite Dr. Bowen, Dr. Kerr. Some of my family come from Cincinnati, et cetera. It's a big deal. And Butch shows up drunk. Now he hasn't been drinking for maybe when I moved to Washington for 6 years. He hadn't been drinking for like 6 years. And then I said to him, "Why are you drunk?" And he said, "Martin and Michelle are going to be leaving and I won't see them again." And I'm like, they're not really leaving? Like, think about it. I mean, Michelle's just going to New York, Martin's going to Washington, for their jobs, and you're not that far away. But that was way too rational to address the emotional process. So anyway, he says Dr. Bowen's outside sitting on a bench with Mike Kerr and Priscilla Friesen, and he wants to sit next to Priscilla. And then Mr. Schara, my father-in-law, says, "But Butch, that's my chair." And Butch said, "Well, I want to sit next to her. She's the prettiest girl here." And Mr. Schara said, "Look, you're hurting all these other women's feelings by saying that Priscilla's the prettiest one." And then he looks at Dr. Bowen. He says, "Dr. Bowen, I'm always putting my foot in my mouth. What can I do?" Dr. Bowen leans forward, looks at Butch. He says, "Butch, let it rip." Let it rip. I'm thinking, God, he's going to take the top off my house, or who knows what's going to happen. This can't be good. Why did he say such a thing? Why is not a good word, but at the time I was thinking there must be some reason. And first thing you know, Butch goes upstairs and I say, "Where are you going?" He says, I'm going to take a nap." And the beauty of this story is that Dr. Bowen could figure out how to set Butch free.
Mm.
Nobody else could do that. He was amazing at seeing the togetherness forces, trying to help Butch be a better human in their view. And everybody did this to Butch. Later that night, I videotaped everything because I never knew exactly what was going on. So I had my video camera recording all of this with Dr. Bowen. And then that night, my aunt came down who looks exactly like my mother, who's died by this time.
Mm.
But seeing her reminds me of my mother. And Butch also came down from his nap, talked to Dana, and every time Dana would try to say something nice, Butch would say, "No, that's not true. This shirt has a hole in it." And I later on counted that he took and twisted things around 10 times negative to one positive comment that he would accept. So that's
Mm.
the world that he lived in. He was just so used to negative interactions.
Mm.
Now I'm going to spin you all the way back to when we came to live with my grandparents. And my grandparents lived in a penthouse on the top 16th story in this high rise in Virginia Beach. And and Butch is like 7, 8 years old. And when we get there, he climbs up on this trellis with some flowers on it, right? And he pulls the whole thing down, and all these flowers come down, and dirt spills all over. My grandfather, an Irish guy, gets so mad. "Butch, you ever do that again, I'm going to send you back to the orphanage."
That's intense.
Yeah. So that's kind of the underlying what is the emotional process that
Mm,
comes up in. And he was named after my grandfather, Walter Marr Maloney.
mm,
And so they're, innocently, we know not what we do, says the Bible. And I think that's true for all of us,
yeah.
like puppets on a string, depending on what the rules are that you're subject to early on, and how the heck do you get over these and create your own rules? Or
Mm,
how do you live Bowen theory, as Dr. Bowen used to put it?
yeah. It's a beautiful example of the subtle intensity of what goes on between people and how much we impact each other. And
Exactly, without knowing it.
without knowing it. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Andrea, Andrea, could you just maybe for those that might not know that are listening, uh, just tell a little bit about who Dr. Bowen is, and w- kind of maybe the importance of his significance, maybe impact,
sure.
something like that.
So Dr. Bowen was the first person to see the family as a system, an emotional system connected to evolution more than to some inner psychic process where you want to sleep with your mother or your father. And the regression comes and you push all that down. As Freud said, I'll stand in back of you and you free associate, and we'll put this story together. Uh, 12 years, 4 times a week.
It's a good living. It's
Put the story together and not be all over the place. Yeah. So psychoanalysis also knew the importance of stories and had a way of trying to set you free or let it rip. And but as Dr. Bowen said, well, it just takes twice as long and to do psychoanalysis as, your family is like free group therapy. And how he came to this huge difference. So this inner psychic world is still the predominant way that psychiatry approaches problems, emotional problems. Is something's wrong with your brain. We're going to give you some drugs, a little shock therapy,
Mhm.
and we'll probably give you the script so that you know what the right thing to say or do is. you know, there there's so many helpful things. Like AA is very helpful, and it lays out a way for you to get from A to Z. And I think that Dr. Bowen brought Al Anon into AA through his relationships with some of the people who were famous. I got to turn off my phone so that no one could call me. So, no, you're not allowed to call me. Sorry about that. Uh, yeah, so he had a lot of influence on people who were interested in family and in relationships. Jody Kellerman wrote the book, the pamphlet called "A Merry-Go-Round Named Denial." But
Mm,
in general, he was not able to influence psychiatry. And systems thinking was just too complicated. And Dr. Bowen used to say it would take something like 200 years for people to approach systems thinking. There are too many variables, and it's too hard to hold all those variables in your head. Uh, and doing a family diagram is hard. So, uh, the medical model, which Dr. Bowen wanted his family systems theory to be part of psychiatry, part of medicine. He thought it would be useful for people to look at the system around the person and not just at the person.
mm,
So this is, you can have a great idea, but you need evidence to prove that your great idea is worth a damn. And so what Dr. Bowen did is he decided that during the war that more people, like my father, were injured psychically than were physically injured.
Mm.
And so he changed his idea of his career from making an artificial heart to contributing something to human behavior. So he was, after World War II, he turned toward understanding human behavior. And he went to the Menger Clinic, which was the premier place to train as a psychiatrist. And he learned so much there at Menninger, and he really admired the two brothers that ran Menninger's. And he has a lot of stories, which I will get to eventually, about, the way he learned at Menninger. But he was isolated there at Menninger. He would, if he wanted to run an idea through, he would have to apply as a researcher. So he applied himself as a researcher and started to do research. And one of the researches that he wanted to do was, of course, what happens when you bring the fathers back into the family and when you bring the mothers. So these, at that time in the 40s, people would be, let's say, 10 years. For 10 years, they would never have seen their parents.
Mm.
They'd be in this nice psych hospital, and maybe they were famous people who could afford this, right? But for a long time, the insurance company also paid for big, long stretches of hospitalization. And
Mm.
so here he is in this world deciding to bring back research on what happens when the parents reunite with the kids. And they're walking across this green patch at Menninger, and the guy says to Dr. Bowen, I have a gift for you. And he says, okay, what is it? And he opens his hand, and in there is a turd. And Dr. Bowen just puts his hands back over the turd and says, I think that's for your parents. And that's the story of how, to me, Family Systems was born.
His observation of the impact that these non-present parents were having on the patients.
Yeah. And
Wow.
how to put it back into the system. That's the crucial part. How do you put it back into the system instead of
Mm.
to your relationship with your psychoanalyst or your social worker, where, you have a secret relationship with your psychoanalyst. You don't tell anybody what's going on. So you get, in my opinion, more and more isolated. But Bowen just broke through all that and broke all these rules, because he could call it research.
Mm. Wow.
And yeah, so at Menninger, he just became a better and better observer. And I think that, a couple of stories about this part of his life are, not really adequate, but I would say uh, he, as an observer, would go with the other residents to the water cooler. And they'd stand around the water cooler and they'd say, hey, Jim, Jim didn't show up. He was 5 minutes late. I don't know what's wrong with Jim. I mean, what's going on with Jim? And Bowen would find himself nodding. I don't really know what's going on with Jim either. But more as he stood there, he would start feeling much more negative about Jim. He was unaware that he was just fitting in the the rules of the tribe around the water cooler. Jim is an idiot. And every organization has a water cooler.
Absolutely.
Every family has a water cooler. And when you get close to it, you feel you must agree. So he gets in his car to drive to Waverly, Tennessee, and see his family. And about halfway down or so, he starts thinking to himself, Jim's really not that bad. I don't know why these guys go. So that Jim, what's going on here? And he starts being much more objective
Mm.
and factual about Jim and the difference about when they start being emotional. And so he goes back into Menninger and he finds that, for 3 or 4 hours, he can keep his separateness and think Jim is okay. But little by little, his objectivity would crumble.
Jim's a loser.
He's a loser, damn it. Exactly. And so he liked to tell that. That's
That's
funny. And
that's
I,
that's great. How he noticed his own susceptibility to the group pressure,
yeah, to togetherness.
to the togetherness.
So the main parts of his theory that were hard for most people in mental health to understand was this leap from trying to be more objective, getting yourself outside the emotional system, and being able to be part of the problem as far as judgment went. If he was judging other people, then he was part of the problem. And he was going to do something about his own self. And this is partially covered in transference and countertransference. So it's not that crazy, separate
Hmm.
way of thinking. This idea that once you can get objective and see the pattern, that you can interfere with it. You
Mm.
can interfere with Jim's okay with me. I don't know why you guys like to get on his back. How's that helping you out?
If you can see it and see how you're getting caught up in it, you can operate a little differently. You can
Yeah.
do something different. Uh,
And I used to, be at the family center and watch myself and other people struggling with this. It's a hard thing to do. Lately, I've come to call it trying to be the monk on the ceiling.
I like it.
So a lot of, what we call storytelling is just trying to embed the conversation with little stories or words that make your brain want to take this in. And that's the power of stories is they're kind of rhythmic, um, they tell a big story. Like just
Mm.
preparing to talk with you, I looked up stories and I wondered about why did Dr. Bowen, the last thing he wrote in the book with Mike Kerr, Family Evaluation, he called it
Uh-huh.
The Odyssey.
Mm.
Odyssey is one of the very first stories humans have told.
Mm.
And uh, it's 3,000 years old, something like that. So says ChatGPT.
Yeah. Well, because it was oral before it was ever written down. It's passed along.
And think of all the ethical things that were presented, yeah, for for him to manage himself with the sirens, and, uh, tying himself to the mast so he wouldn't be tempted. That's real control over the emotional system there.
It's a great metaphor for it.
Yeah, it's a great.
That's
And
what
that's
it feels like sometimes. How do I not do what I normally do?
what I'm programmed to do.
What I'm programmed to do.
I'll put that in. But yeah, so these are the kinds of stories that give you the big picture. It's not, I just get fascinated by the stories that Dr. Bowen told, or the way he related to me, the way I related to him. Um, yeah, all in an effort to pull my functioning up.
Hmm. How did you meet him?
Oh,
How'd you get involved?
so my brother thought he was Jesus. And when I was going to visit him in the chapter one has this whole story, I'll say, in my book about Butch and psychiatry. And but I knew when Butch's 30 days had run out in the locked ward and he was going to be that I knew nothing about human behavior. That for the outgoing interview, like with the psychiatrist, he says, like, your brother will be in and out of hospitals all his life. He's psychotic.
This is what they're telling you, the
Yeah.
psychiatrist.
The exit interview. He says, you need a friend, and maybe you'd like to go out to dinner with me. And I'm like, that's what psychiatry has dinner and my brother in the hospital all his life. I was just a nervous wreck. And I'm going through the tunnel that connects Hampton Roads with Virginia Beach, and the rain that had been pick, 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 just all of a sudden lessened. And I started to be able to think while I was in that tunnel, I need to learn everything there is to know about families. These people are stuck in psychiatry and they're labeling him. He doesn't have a chance.
Mm,
I'm going to study and find out everything they know. Yeah.
mm,
So it took about 2 years for me. I didn't understand that, I only had 2 years of college when Dr. Bowen picked me as a likely candidate for the postgraduate training. It's another story, but I got a job finally after being a volunteer in drug treatment programs and what have you. I got a job as an alcoholism counselor in this Tidewater Psychiatric Institute in Virginia.
mm,
I'd worked there for 6 months when somebody named Marcy Solomon, a friend of mine, invited Dr. Bowen to come. And they left two papers out, the anonymous paper and the other one, Theory of Schizophrenia or something like that. So I read these papers and I was really super impressed that he broke so many rules. I mean, it was against the rules to talk about your family in public. It was against the rules to make any kind of effort to treat your family, if you will. And
mhm,
those were huge rules that he just upped and broke in 1967 when he did all that work with his own family. And that was the anonymous paper. And I was amazed that he had that courage to do that. And so, yeah, he won my heart. and so I went to the symposium and with a friend of mine, Lina Watson, and Lina, and I saw that Dr. Bowen eating his powdered donut had left some powder on his cheek. And so she just reached over and brushed his powder off his cheek. And I was went crazy. Lina, shouldn't you ask Dr. Bowen before you touch him? Or maybe just tell him he has the option to himself. And Dr. Bowen and Lina and another woman that was there was just laughing their heads off, and I obviously was a fool. But that didn't stop me. So now he knows that I'm a helper and I will defend him. So he says, I want you to take me to the stage. I say, okay. And I walk down the aisle about halfway down. He stops. He says, look, you're from here. You know these people, and you've read my papers. I want you to tell me what should I say to these people that they'll understand. And I said, Dr. Bowen, those people who are here today love AA, and they're not going to understand anything you have to say. So why don't you just say what you want to say? No risk. They're not going to get it. And his little blue eyes lit up, and he was like, just so I could tell, very pleased, you know. So I sat down, not knowing what was going to happen, but I knew I'd given the right answer. Say what you want to say. And so he gets up there, he says what he wants to say. He talks about if you want to cure alcoholism, think about how you might de-twitch a mouse. If you want to cure alcoholism, you got to figure out how to de-twitch a mouse. Because if a mouse is twitchy, it's going to drink. And it doesn't have to tell you all stories, sad stories, as a reason for your drinking. No, you're just twitchy. And I thought, that's such a great word, de-twitching. I'm at the right place. And then,
Uh,
it just went on from there.
yeah.
And I,
You were taken with his ideas and his way of being.
yeah, his way of being, I think, is uh, he, it's like being with somebody he's at a completely another level, and he opens a door and lets you look inside. And
Mm,
there's a system waiting if you want to learn about it, but it's not what's wrong with Butch. That's another door. That's normal psychiatry. Let's, label them, diagnose them, give them drugs and all that. Not thinking about taking the anxiety in the system down or where all this anxiety came from.
mm.
Because that would be too long of an interview and the insurance companies don't want to pay for it. We want 10-minute interviews, not an hour and a half. So you're bound by the system you're a part of, make a little difference here and there. And I think that's the way he saw it. So anyway, I say to him, look, I want to learn everything there is to know about families. He had talked about learning without a terminal degree. He offers no
Mm.
terminal degree, no, you're great degree, no, you passed with flying color degree. No, just if you want to learn. And so I said, I want to learn. I want to learn everything there is to know about families. And I doubt that anybody else had said that to him. I want to learn everything. It was kind of, you know, pompous on my part that I could possibly learn everything about family seems ridiculous. But at the time, it was sincere, genuine, and
Yeah.
I knew it was important. Yeah. And so, he said, he took my name, said, I'll be back in touch with you. Later, I found out he asked around about me, was I a hard worker or whatever. And then I get a letter in the mail saying, you've been accepted into the postgraduate program. I'm like, I called up Mike Kerr, like Mike Kerr, Dr. Kerr, something's wrong. I haven't graduated from college, much less getting a master's or a PhD or any other thing. And Dr. Kerr said, it doesn't really matter because Dr. Bowen liked you. Just you're going to get in. And that was how I met Dr. Bowen,
Mm.
a relationship with him.
That's that's a great story. How did you what was what really got the ball rolling for you in working on these ideas in your own life?
Well, my first supervisor, Bud Andres, um, at that time, every year you got a new supervisor. And in the postgraduate program, Dr. Bowen would come in and give the talks in the morning, and then you'd have supervision in the afternoon for 3 days.
Mm.
Uh, Bud Andres said to me, um, put your family diagram up and you can be last because you're new. I had missed the first session. And so I watched everybody do the squares and circles and so I drew my circles and squares and only everybody had died, but my grandfather who was still alive at I think 86 or so. But my mom and dad and my other three grandparents had all died. And when I put that family diagram up there, Bud Andre said to me, who do you have to hang on to when your grandfather dies?
Mm.
Like, my grandfather's gonna die? What the, how could that be? Oh my God. Yeah. What?
Uh,
Yeah. My mother's an only child. Her first cousin, the same age she was, I knew pretty well. And she married and had 5 kids. And the next to the youngest was a girl, Sita, who I got along with reasonably well. But he's talking to me about those great aunts, my grandmother's sisters. And I'm like, I don't want to go to Elyria, Ohio and see these old people. This is not my thing. And my dad is the oldest of 5. And I really
mm,
had more to do with them, but they didn't really like me that much because they had to look after my father while I was looking after my grandparents. And my father's family were, relatively speaking, poor. They become rich in the later years with my uncle, my father's brother started a company called Williamsburg Pottery Factory. And my grandparents, of course, had all this social position and what have you. So it was very imbalanced between these two sides of my family. And
mm,
um, take on the hardest part first. Go to Elyria, Ohio, and visit your great aunts and get to know people. So that was my first,
wow.
my first real foray into what it means to be interested in Bowen theory, trying to
Mm,
live life in a way that allows you to see the system without condemning it.
yeah. And connecting with people is one way to do that.
Yeah. I mean, my cousin Liz went with me, and I was sort of a nervous wreck. And I was like, maybe we should stop here. The truck drivers, they almost always have some extra pot. We could borrow a little pot, smoke and joint when we go in to see the great ants. Just be more relaxed. And my cousin Liz said, that's very funny. But let's just buy him some Chinese dinner and maybe some donuts. So we drive into Elyria, Ohio, and there's this old house on the Black River, and there are all these statues on their front porch of Jesus and Mary and Joseph and everybody. All, they're this tall, they're big.
Uh,
And the ants came out and hugged us. They were just so glad to see us, and they really appreciated the Chinese food and the donuts. And Liz and I spent the night there, kind of laughing about all our fears. And so that's
no.
that's really the two things that I got almost immediately was that uh, you need to be able to be connected to the people your family is cut off from, and
Mm,
you need to be able to be more um, neutral about what is going on, and you need to be able to make contact with people who've been cut off from your family. And,
mm,
so the kind of my marching instructions that I gathered from Bud Andres in that first meeting. And that's how I started. So I had a piece of paper. These are the hard people to relate to. These are the easy ones. And if you
and you started with the hard ones.
start with the hard one, and then you relax and go to visit. So I go to Elyria, Ohio, and then I go to Cincinnati. And that's where my mother's family was. And they were just easy people for me to talk to. Yeah.
Mm. And your aunts were from your dad's side of the family.
Yeah. My father's mother, Cecilia Maloney, the oldest of
Mm.
8. And they were the ones that brought out the Brabazon Castle and just busted up my thought that I was a nice, sweet Irish or human being. And now I belong to this warrior group. He got his title and all the land, which they still have the Brabazon Castle That's the Earl of Meath by jousting. I kind of love this that,
This
in
is great.
one's just jousting. My poor aunts have given me the castle and the memory of jousting. So he was the number one jouster in Ireland. He came
Wha-
from
wha-
Belgium, and he was the treasurer of Ireland at that time in 16 something.
huh?
But you know how families are. They some go well and some don't. You know, the ones who don't go well are observing and they are absorbing the anxiety for the others so that at least one or two in your family can survive. Maybe eight or nine have to die. A lot
I
of my
love this.
family had to die.
Uh, I love the claim to fame of being the best jouster.
Yeah, let's get on
You
that
know?
horse. Got the thing here.
Yeah.
Head out for that other person. And
You know,
so, I could identify with that.
I was thinking about that. Maybe you got a little bit of the jousting blood.
Yeah, possibly.
That's
Yeah,
maybe that's one of the things Bowen saw in you too.
maybe. Yeah. The determination, the determination, no doubt that he picked up on that. But then, I mean, so, I don't know. I guess I'll skip ahead
Yeah.
to being the teacher's pet.
Yeah. So because you started to after you did the postgraduate, you continued the relationship with working with
He
Bowen.
hired me to be the audiovisual person. So in 1990, I had had 4 years of postgraduate training, and came up and went to uh, the clinical conferences, and there's a whole part I'll put in there at some point about the clinical conferences. But Dr. Bowen, well, let's see, he basically thought, I think, that I could handle the job of the AV coordinator and still do my clinical practice. So he said,
Mhm.
we can't afford to pay you that much, but it was like almost 40% more than I was making at working in the psychiatric hospital. I made $8,000, and then he gave me a $12,000 salary in 1976. Woo. My kids were both seniors in high school, and they were not too happy about that. But when Dr. Bowen told me, you'd have to move here up to Washington. And so I said, okay, I'll ask my ex-husband if he'll look after the kids. And he was thrilled. He was delighted. He said, yes, you've had them for 7 years and I'd like to live with them. And
Mm.
so then I could move up to Washington and find a place. I lived with my cousin Liz for about 6 months, and then I bought an old family home with Liz, which was an opportunity to define a self like nothing else. But anyway, he offered me the job, and he said, just take your time. You can have a week or so to decide if you want the job or not. And I said, no, I'm going to take the job. I don't know what I have to do, but I'm going to take the job. Get a chance to work with Dr. Bowen. That was amazing.
Mm.
So I don't know if I should go into the first day at work, but it's a pretty funny story.
Please.
Any other questions so far that
Oh, now I'm curious about this first day at work.
well, I tried to make you curious, so I figured it out, I guess, for the moment. But yeah, so um, I've already got this feeling that I'm the teacher's pet. I'm special, and I hate that. That is not a good position to be in. And and so the first day at work, I have to go and see uh, Ruth Sager, who's the administrator of the, well, and she says, I just don't understand why Dr. Bowen picked you. Usually he lets me hire people, but for some reason he liked you. And I said, well, the reason he told me was that it was easy to teach somebody how to run a camera, and it was really hard to teach somebody Bowen theory. And since I'd already had 4 years of Bowen theory, you know, that job should be easy for me just to learn how to run a video camera, which I already knew. And so Ruth kind of laughed, and we went around and looked at the building and all the different offices, which at that time people would pay to have an, or they got a free office there if they were on the faculty. And there's a little kitchen there where you can have coffee and all the, all the things like that that were special for people who work there. So I go in for the noon meeting, and the noon staff and faculty meeting. For some unknown reason, ungodly reason, there's a table. Dr. Bowen sits here, Mike Kerr sits here, and I sit right between them like an idiot. So dumb. But anyway, I sat next to Dr. Bowen, further away from Mike Kerr. And then all the rest of the people come in and they're like the audience.
They're watching.
Dr. Bowen goes around to each person, says, what have you been up to? What's going on? This and that. When he got to me, he said, all right, what have you been up to? And well, I said, well, Dr. Bowen, I just started this job like 3 hours ago. I don't know. And he slammed his fist on the desk and said, you will talk. Like, I guess I'm not the teacher's pet. He screams at me in front of everybody and tells me what to do. So then I start talking about driving across Key Bridge, thinking about my new job, walking up the stairs, finding Ruth, going through all the details until I finally got in the conference room and sat next to Dr. Bowen. Yeah. And maybe that was a 5-minute talk, but it felt like an eternity.
Uh,
And so he said, come see me in my office. And I'm like, okay, first day at work, I'm going to get fired. So I go into his office and he sits down, lights up a cigarette. And he says, there was an older woman who had lots and lots of children, too many. And she told those kids, don't you dare go near that sand pit. Something happens, you fall in the sand pit, it's over. And so for a while, it worked out okay. And then one day she hears this kid yelling, Mom, Mom, help me, Mom. So she goes down, she gets a 2x4. She sees the kid slowly sinking into the sand, puts a 2x4 down, walks out, puts her foot on top of his head and squishes him down into the walks away and said, one less mouth to feed. And I said, oh my God, uh, does that mean you're not going to help me out if I get into trouble? Just smiled, took a puff on a cigarette. And he asked me some other questions, a few other questions. But yeah,
was he
that's how we
uh,
handle things.
mm, with through stories often and kind of
Yeah.
demonstration? Maybe demonstration is the wrong word, maybe, but
But yeah, he lived Bowen theory. Work
yeah,
on being more differentiated. Yeah. And I'll tell one more story that uh, the Voice of America people wanted to interview him about what is family therapy. And that was right, the question you asked, what's so different about family therapy? What is this
yeah, yeah.
definition of self thing all about? What does it mean to be more differentiated? Voice of America comes in and they set up this audio equipment, and Dr. Bowen says, you can stay for the interview, and I stay there. And the guy starts asking Dr. Bowen questions, just like you were. And instead of answering them, he starts talking about evolution, which is, as far as the interviewer is concerned, so far away when what he wants to learn about is how do you fix people? I don't want to know about the reptilian brain and whether or not bees can play. I don't want to learn about I don't want to learn about mammals and how they manage their jealousy, what have you. Huh? But instead of answering any question, he just talked about what was on his mind. And
Mm.
finally, the interviewer said, well, I think that's enough for today. All his equipment together, just ready to leave. And he looks at me and says, that guy, he's difficult. Saying, oh, he's differentiated. He's just trying to stay on his own path and not bend to your wish,
Yeah.
not get into the togetherness. But this is me, and this is what I choose to do. And I'll pay the
Mm.
consequences for it. But this is what I will and will not do. And that was just a part of his defining himself in these little ways. This is what I will and will not do.
Mm.
To
How,
me, it was um, such strength of character to live Bowen theory as a principled way of being, not interfering with what others want to do, but being clear about what I will and will not do.
based on principle, based on what your principles are, at least as clear as they can be in that moment.
Yeah,
Yeah. So hard to do in the in any time, but there's something about the pressures around us, right? To bend, to shift, to adapt,
yeah,
accommodate.
it's
Mm,
crazy.
it really is. I got a million things running through my mind.
Well, it's, the way really you come to observe human nature as part of nature. Not that people are out to do you in or out to do anybody in. It's just the way that we've evolved as social animals, and stories help us see some part of the emotional system
Mm,
that, is difficult to see. We think,
yeah,
I'm in charge. Me. Little me.
that ain't the case.
That ain't the case.
We can navigate it at best, maybe choose how we navigate it.
Yeah.
Uh,
That,
what would you say is kind of how Bowen used story? What I one of the things I heard you say was it helps people see things that
yeah.
maybe you if you tried to explain, it's not the same.
It
Can't see it
won't
in the
stick
same
in
way.
your brain. Yeah, it won't stick with you. But some people have read my book and say, how do you remember all these things? And I said, there's probably so much fear involved in being abandoned, or, that you've got to be a good observer, or you're going to end up in the orphanage. Uh, but fear is
Mm,
probably a large part of what bonds tribal people together,
mm,
that they need to be able to survive. And so these, pretty primitive fear-based instincts, and that's probably what you pay attention to the most. And then, of course, oxytocin and all when you have babies. I'm a great grandmother now, and holding that
mm.
baby, I mean, it's just like an amazing shot of oxytocin, Wow, I would do anything for that child, little Sophie, yeah, anything.
Thank God we get it too, because when they start screaming and crying, it's challenging.
It is. But yeah, stories just help you regulate, I think. They help you to understand what you're feeling,
Mm,
what has gone on to get you to the position you're in right now, and where you might want to go. What further do you want to do? But it's stories I think of today have been about kind of power shifts, to go back to the power of blaming the individual with diagnosing them and that, to
Hmm.
seeing the system. I'm sure maybe Dr. Bowen hated the word power, but I still use it. So, yeah, I think I put in a little bit about the importance of being an observer, and that if you come from an alcoholism family, you probably don't trust everything people say. You probably
Mm.
watch a little bit more, uh,
Mm.
if you're lucky. Yeah. It's not that you blame your parents for their drinking or whatever, but that you see what's happened to them over time.
And that would be part of that the fear that you were talking about earlier. This
Yeah,
I'm more aware because I'm afraid of what might happen if I'm not.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that gives you the experience, that of the story of building trust, or like in the Odyssey, all the things that he had to go through, and his wife was still bound to him, even though these other men wanted her and would try to convince her husband was dead. And yeah, it's holding on to yourself despite the pressure of others.
Mm. Absolutely.
And I think that's what Bowen, to me, that's what Bowen was all about. Um, he,
Holding on to yourself despite the pressure of others.
yeah,
Mm.
and thinking for yourself. And he gave one thing of fusion, it's a fusion with the other, is you don't think for yourself. You feel like the other person, uh, and any kind of disagreement makes you feel like you've been betrayed. And the the one liner is, I'm okay if we are okay.
That's fusion. I'm okay if we're okay. Uh,
Yeah. And again, people can't, it's hard. It was hard for me to see the fusion, to see the togetherness, to deal with this pull to go along with others, and to
mm.
stand, naked in the wind, so to speak, because you think differently than the people you love.
Do you have a story about standing naked in the wind?
Was every story is about that. But I don't know why it comes to mind that, I used to stand by Dr. Bowen, and I organized all the conference things, just, the
Yeah.
age and this and that. And then he'd come early, and he'd be there, and I'd go up and talk to him after my job was done. And usually that was fine. But this one particular day, I don't know why he was in such a bad mood. He's in a really rotten mood. And my hair's all curly, looks pretty good. And he starts ranting about the crowd. These people think they can differentiate themselves in a day, maybe a weekend. And he's yelling at the audience. They're trying to find their seats. And my hair went completely straight.
Uh,
I had absorbed all this anxiety that was in the room. And I was trying not to take sides or tell Dr. Bowen, shut up or calm down or something, and just absorb it.
oh,
So the other
uh,
part I wanted to put in, I don't know if this is a good way to put it in, but
yeah.
it's Dr. Bowen, and then there's Mrs. Bowen, this triangle,
Oh,
and how when I travel with Dr. Bowen later parts of his life, how that, worked, how I tried to work my part of this triangle thing. But let's see about what other questions you might have.
well, you were just talking about him speaking to the crowd, and I know you had some story that you wanted to touch on about the clinical conferences that he used to that you
Yeah,
guys used to put on,
right.
and about the how he used them, saw them, and how they would function or something.
Another peek into how different he was and how he was ready to break rules. And he said about his own work with his family uh, that if Bowen theory doesn't work for my family, then why do I care about it? Yeah. And that is so far away from normal psychiatry where you're not supposed to be a person. You're a blank sheet and people project onto you, and that's how they solve their problems. But in his systems thinking, he seemed to be much more inclined to be himself and let's see if people can deal with him.
Mm,
But he was going to do what he believed in, and it was up to you what you were going to do to deal with him.
yeah. Kind of despite being focused on how I want to operate and letting other people uh, come up against that and decide what they want to do. I I wish I could do that more.
Yeah. Another funny story was we moved to Washington, so he's going to work at NIMH, and he has no friends in psychiatry, nobody that he can really relate to. So he makes friends with people in the square dance group, and he becomes president of the square dance group. And one day he decides, guys, his two best friends, let's go up to Jim and tell Jim, Jim, you're the best square dancer here, but today you're looking kind of lousy. Is your wife not treating you right? Like, what's going on with you? And the other two guys are laughing. Yeah, we're gonna smack it to him. And let's go up and say to Bill one at a time, Bill, I've never seen you dance so well. Man, you just took the top off the cover. You're just amazing, Bill. Wow. And sure enough, by the end of that square dance group, Bill was great and Jim looked horrible. So this was about as close as Bowen got to Skinner, I guess, and behavior. Another person who went in this direction, Don Jackson,
Yeah.
analyzed the interactions that are taking place and how you can really influence somebody's behavior when you're a dangerous
Mm,
man or a dangerous woman.
mm.
So he had other ways of being negative about me and humiliating me. So one time he and Mike Kerr making this series of videotapes. I'm running a camera and the Bowen Kerr series, it's called.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, Dr. Bowen starts talking about the AV person. The AV person lets medical school students into the studio and allows them to watch any video they want. And then the AV person doesn't even ask them what they got out of that. And I don't understand why the AV person lets the medical students get away with all this. I was like, please, God, help me with this. After that, any medical school student that wanted to see Dr. Bowen and Carl Whitaker or whatever, had to jump a few fences and had to give me a answer as to what they got out of it and
Uh,
report to Dr. Bowen. At one time, Dr. Bowen walks by my office and he sees that I'm videotaping Ed Friedman. And
mm.
um, after Ed leaves, he says, why do you let Ed Friedman into your AV studio? Why are you taping him? And I said, well, one, I'm learning something from Ed about the way he organizes himself in relationship to his clients. And the second thing is, we're making $25 for the family center. I charge Ed 25 bucks to videotape him. And he looks at me disgusted and walks out. There are many of these kind of situations too, in which his way of dealing with me made it, stand on your own.
Yeah. And it's
But
and I love the moments when it sounds like it helped you in some way learn to stand on your own.
Yeah, I really was trying to get my relationship with him more even. So
Mm,
I wanted to believe that he was doing these kind of testing things and it was up to me to see if I could survive them or manage them or have fun with them. And I think that's what led to his allowing me to go with him as his health declined. And he told me that he needed somebody to travel with him. And I said, well, I'll do it. I have the video camera. I could videotape these conferences and then I'll get free admission. And you know, so he agreed
mm.
those terms, and then I got to travel around with him
What was that like traveling with him at that part?
as his health declined.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if the first place we went was Asheville. I think first place we drove to Pittsburgh and did the Pittsburgh people first. Um, and that was fine. We each of us had a hotel room, and uh, I was not too far if something happened to him, and that became more important as he declined in his health. Um, but going to Asheville, we got that was the first plane ride. Oh, we're sit down in the seats, and the plane takes off, and Dr. Bowen starts saying, I can't breathe that well.
Mm.
And I'm thinking to myself, is he trying to trick me? So I decided to test it. And I said, well, Dr. Bowen, there's some oxygen masks right above your head. And you could ask the stewardess if she could let that oxygen mask down because you're having trouble breathing. And you could more or less take care of it yourself. And he says, what are you talking about? Don't you know that they can't let down one oxygen mask? Has to be all the oxygen masks. And he says, what are you going to do if I die? And I said, well, I have put some thought into it. And if you were to die on the plane, I don't want to upset people. I'm not going to say you're dead to the steward. I'm just going to sit here with you pretending you're napping. And when everybody gets off the plane, then I'm going to tell the stewardess that you died. Could they please call your wife to come pick up your body?
Uh,
Let's see how long that would have been. It would have been let's see, 76 to maybe that was in 80, 87 or 88.
Still over.
12 years of practice to get to
Yeah.
that point.
Mm. To be able to not get overly anxious with him about the situation like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
When he's sitting next to you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He is
Putting the pressure on.
it's not a silly thing, but I think Dr. Bowen saw himself as part of every problem that he saw. And he transmitted that knowledge to me. I'm part of every problem. How am I going to deal with this in a way that enables me to be more of a self, not at the expense of the other?
Mm.
So that's where you need your sense of humor and, you know, uh, that kind of thing.
I was just thinking about the uh, kind of how playfulness and humor had been important to
Yeah,
you in that relationship with Bowen, and you know.
exactly. Yeah. Um, and now Mrs. Bowen. So when I started to travel with Dr. Bowen, I'd always gotten along with Mrs. Bowen. And but now I was going to travel with him. I wasn't quite sure how it would all go. And so I said something to her about, you know, do you want me to travel with him? Just put her
Mhm.
in charge. And she said, he'll live a lot longer if you'd be willing to do it.
Mm.
She said, I can't do it. She said, but I trust you. And I think it would be good for him to continue to be able to travel. So I got her permission before I did anything.
Mm.
Um, and I kept it that way. There's one really, really funny story. So I had pretty much established that I was on her side, but I was not ever going to take her side.
Got it.
And first time we're going on a trip to somewhere where I've left my car there, and Mrs. Bowen is driving us to the airport. And on the way, she's upset with him about he didn't call her after the last place we'd gone. And there had been a terrible storm, and all kinds of tree limbs were on the ground. And she had to call the insurance company, and she couldn't get a hold of him, and, you know, all this stuff. And, uh, and Dr. Bowen just tried to ignore it and said, look at the buildings, look at the trees. And he never defended himself or said anything about what she said. Um, and so when we get to the airport, I'm helping Dr. Bowen with his luggage. I get my luggage, I close the trunk, and Mrs. Bowen drives off with my purse in her car. And I call a taxi. That was when we still had taxis. Follow that woman. Way to her house. I tell her what's happened. I jump in the taxi back to National Airport, 7 minutes to spare. And meanwhile, Dr. Bowen's just sitting there, not at all upset about anything. And he's just cool as he can be. And we get on the plane, and he starts talking about the Boeing 707, how many seats it has, blah, 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 what year it was developed. And it was one of the things that Dr. Bowen loved to talk about, working in the garage in the Model T Fords when he was young, and everything
Mm.
possibly that you could know about airplanes that were facts. He loved to talk
Mm.
about facts. And, and I learned a lot more than I ever needed to know about airplanes.
Uh, that's fast. So you had a good relationship with both of them.
Yeah. And then one year, we had the banquet every year. And this year, Um, the banquet consisted of the three clowns showing up in clown outfits, going into the audience, picking up Mrs. Bowen and putting her on a three-legged stool. And then one of the clowns announced that they were going to help her differentiate a self. They started putting makeup on her so she can better differentiate because she looks good. And sitting next to Bowen, who's looking pretty uncomfortable, is the head of the APA, the American Psychiatric Association.
Yeah.
And so I took some pictures of this, and I took some pictures of Dr. Bowen and the head of the APA. And in about a week, I get a letter from Dr. Bowen saying, you destroy all those photographs and the negatives. That was so humiliating. It should never have happened. Blah, 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 blah. The faculty are really upset about it. Destroy the negatives. And so my heart was pounding, but I knew this is a chance to differentiate a self in a little way. And so I get all the pictures. I leave the conference early. I usually walk with Dr. Bowen looking for our two cars, and we relate to each other about our lost cars. But this time I just leave. I call up Mrs. Bowen. I say, I've got a present for you. Can I come over? Yes. So I go over there and I give her all these photographs of the clowns. And all of a sudden we hear the garage door going up. She looks at me, I look at her, we're like, oh my God, here he comes. And he's going to be, I told her about the letters that I had received and that I had written to him and said, I never destroy negatives. Photographer keeps all their negatives. And so he comes up, he takes one look at her, the pictures, and me, and he bursts out laughing. And Mrs. Bowen says, Murray, I don't know why you got so upset. I knew everything about that. I just them. Oh my. And so, you know, the trust between the two of us was building, and it didn't bother Dr. Bowen.
Mm.
Now we're at 10:36. I have the last story to tell,
Yeah, please.
Bowen, but I want to ask you, what have you gotten out of this so far? And
Well, I think I came into family systems theory and Bowen theory with just relating to the concepts. And then I started to meet more people in that world and hear how they were thinking about it, which was useful. But listening to you talk about the guy behind the theory and that it really came out of I was telling you this earlier, his effort to uh, act in a disciplined way in the world. And I find it so useful to hear those to hear the stories about what that looks like in somebody's life, you know, because I'm trying to do the same effort in my own way.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
he had a thing. Um, it's called We Forget, and hopefully I'll remember to send it to you. But we forget that family systems theory is a way of life to be lived out in everything we do, and that it is not just another dogma to be preached to the gullible disciples. We know with our heads that good things can happen in families when we can maintain a modicum of self control and stay in contact. But we tend to forget the same thing applies to us professionally. We lapse back into claiming how great I am. Then family systems theory becomes a dogma, and doing it becomes a technique.
Mm,
Wonder why trainees fail without ever looking at our own failures. It goes on a little bit more.
mm. Yeah, I would love to have it. You know,
Yeah.
I really appreciate that distinction of how it can slip into a technique rather than something you're doing in your life,
Yeah.
which I think is such a more useful way to think about it and to relate to it, you know.
And I do think that he really pointed to the importance of communication. He didn't have enough time to develop it. But these stories are all about communication, the words you use, the way you explain things, what's important, and
Mm,
how do you go about communicating your best self while you're being your best self? They're two different things. Uh,
mm,
but communicating, he said, if Don Jackson had lived, he would have developed his ideas. But I see a lot of Don Jackson's ideas like I'm certain there are a lot of people who believe Bowen only asks questions, and that's being a Bowen coach. It's just ask questions. A lot of people believe that. To me,
mm,
it's ridiculous or silly. Um, you're trying to get to know another person and what they're up against, and you're trying to be of some use to them. But questions are not the answer. It's one way of relating to people. And it kind of puts the coach up here asking questions to this poor person down here, which I don't.
mm.
But anyway,
What
there's
would be what
said
would
about,
be an addition? Oh, I'm sorry, Andrew.
go ahead.
No, what if it's not just questions, it's stories would be another part of it.
See, how are you going to relate to another person and their issues
Mm.
in a way that gives them the greatest possible freedom?
Which isn't just questions. I get it. Yeah.
Questions are good, but risk yourself. Why not risk yourself? Instead of sitting up on the fence saying, I'm the coach and you're the poor patient.
Yeah. Like that moment with your brother, let it rip,
Yeah,
you know.
there's so many stories of, buy the book, by the way. The book will come out maybe in 6 months or so with all these stories in it. Yeah. Plus, just the struggle it is to change your mind when you've been trained one way to think another way.
Mm.
So
So tell, what's this final story you wanted to tell?
um, Mrs. Bowen, uh, Dr. Bowen had asked me, please go with me to this AAMFT meeting where they're going to honor me as a pioneer of family therapy. And he had refused to go to a lot of these meetings, but he wanted to go to this one. It's 3 days before he's going to die. There are like 800 people waiting for him to come. So I have this knowledge in the background. I park my car, I go in their house. Mrs. Bowen sees me. Come here right now. You need to do something with him. I'm like, what? I'm not very good at doing anything with him. And he says he's trying to smoke a cigarette while he's on oxygen. You got to do something. So I'm like, oh, what a triangle this is. But what am I going to do? So I go down there. He's got his cigarette and he's got his oxygen. He's looking out the window at the limo. He hasn't made any moves yet. And so Mrs. Bowen goes down, all right, what do you, I really don't want you to light that cigarette while you're on oxygen. And I said to Dr. Bowen, what's this like for you? Is it you're going into battle and you've got your last cigarette? Is that what it is? It's the last cigarette you're ever going to smoke before you go into this war zone. And you need your oxygen in order to keep going. Is that what this is? And if so, maybe your wife would let you hold the oxygen while you can light the cigarette.
Mm.
And Mrs. Bowen, would you be willing to hold the oxygen while he lights that last cigarette? And so, in a way, I put the two of them together and got myself outside of it to some degree. And Mrs. Bowen said, yes, she'll take the oxygen and he could smoke that cigarette if that's what he wants to do. She's got the oxygen, and Dr. Bowen lights that last cigarette, takes one puff, puts the cigarette out,
Mm.
and we walk up the stairs, get into the limo, and go to meet the 800 family therapists waiting for the pioneer of all pioneers. And he's got oxygen and he's got a wheelchair. The driver helps him with that. And he says something to me on the ride like, I'd rather have you than the driver, than the limo driver. I'm like, hey, if the limo driver would be just as good. But yeah, I was ready for whatever was going to happen. Maybe the limo driver wasn't ready for all that was going to happen. So we go in there and people start running all over the place because he looks like he's going to die right there. And people run over, get a pillow and put it under his arm. And I say to them, like, did he ask you to do that? Do you think he needs that? Or is that your need? Like, why
Mm.
did you talk to him? You're going to do stuff. We think he's going to die. He shouldn't go up on stage and die right there. And I said, well, why don't you ask Dr. Bowen if he's going to die on stage? He probably knows. And then this, the doctor comes over, whose name is escaping me at the moment. Um, I say to him, if you ask Dr. Bowen if he wants to go on stage and if he thinks he'll be alive and not die on stage, I think you'll get the right answer. I don't have the right answer for him because they all want me to make some statement. and and so they wheel Dr. Bowen out and he's on stage and everybody goes, "Oh my God, he's gonna," the whole 800 people are like, "Here he is in a wheelchair with his oxygen." He showed 800 family therapists. It was mind-boggling. And and then the doctor gave, asked him a question, what's been important to you in your life? And he said, differentiation of self has been important to me my whole life. Once I stumbled on it, and I would never
Mm.
go back. If I could live a little longer, I would do everything I could to be more differentiated, to work on differentiation. And and the doctor said, "Can I say amen to that?" He says, "Yeah." And then got back in the limo and went home. And 3 days later, he died.
Mm.
So
Mm.
I thought that's a good ending note.
That's a it's a great ending note and a beautiful story uh, of the whole captures the whole thing. You know, Andrew, as you were talking, I was thinking of your question to me, how this has been useful to me. Uh, and I spoke about Bowen, but I was also thinking just now about your effort in it, your part in it, uh, and hearing your stories of how you managed yourself and your attempt to kind of grow up in that situation and in that relationship. Um, was incredibly useful to listen to think about.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
that was the intention, pass on your experience, pass on your knowledge, and let people do with it whatever they want.
yeah. You know, I remember you saying one time that Bowen loved Saint Francis of Assisi. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was the most differentiated person as far as he knew on earth.
Interesting.
But he loved the prayer of St. Francis and Louise Rossio, who's a nurse and really a missionary faculty member, I'd say, just salt of the earth woman. And she brought him the book on St. Francis and the prayer of St. Francis, which was what meant everything to him. But he loved how he lived his life. Really
Hmm.
sure man.
Interesting.
I didn't,
Now I got to read Saint Francis.
yeah, yeah,
What were you going to say, Andrew? And he what?
yeah. I just say, and he was private about his belief about spiritual lives, but
Hmm.
he did make two appearances with Joe Carolyn, who's a Jesuit, and talking about spirituality. I don't know how you get hold of those. I guess they're at the Bowen Center. Um, but yeah, he did try to make it spirituality or miracles understandable instead of mystical.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, Andrew, I will put up whenever you get the link for your book. I'll put it up wherever I can, and we'll get people make it available to everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate
Uh, I really appreciate talking to you. I had a great time.
it. Okay. Namaste.
Thank you, Andrea.
You're welcome.